Good afternoon or good morning, depending what time zone you're coming from. Excited to welcome everybody on this next AI webinar series by Academy XI. I'm just going to give people time to dial in. Those numbers are going quite high up. We've got 38 people so far, and then we'll get started. So we're recording the session for anybody who just for FYI, and also we've got live captions that you can turn on should you need it. So I'm just going to share my screen. Fantastic. All right. Some great numbers happening. So maybe I'll get started. So thanks everyone for joining us for yet another Academy XI AI webinar series. We run these monthly, so it's good to have you with us today. First and foremost, I wanted to acknowledge the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, which is where Sarah and myself are coming from in Melbourne. And I wanted to extend my acknowledgement and respect to past, present, and emerging leaders, as well as extend that acknowledgement to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. So the format will be, if you haven't joined us before, a 5-minute introduction by myself, just quickly talking about what we do at Academy XI, and then introducing my lovely co-host and speaker today, Sarah. And then Sarah will, spend between 30 and 40 minutes talking. And by all means, use the chat function if you want to have a bit of a chit chat, and Sarah asks a question and wants to do a bit of a live poll. And then put your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll definitely have time either during, depending on how Sarah wants to go, or at the very end, a good 10 to 15 minutes to address any questions you may have. Quickly about Academy XI. So our mission to transform the world through education. And we've been around for over 10 years, teaching adults digital skills to prepare them for future. In terms of our portfolio of training products, we've got a business, technology, and design related courses, both for consumers, so B2B and B2C, as well as enterprise B2B. And obviously, AI sits very much within our technology portfolio and platform. In terms of the trainings that we do provide, we have half-day and full-day fundamentals workshops in AI, as well as AI workshops for sort of business leaders, but also we can build bespoke training based on anybody's needs. So please reach out to myself if you have any more questions. We've got a first chat already. Oh, yeah, Sarah. Sarah's part of this amazing talk that we're going to do. Well, let's get some introductions happening. This is not about me today. This is all about Sarah. So I came across Sarah probably about a year ago, Sarah, I think, maybe even longer. But I'll be honest with you, I feel like I've known Sarah for decades. She's such a humble, lovely, and warm individual that I enjoy having a chat with every time I come across her. She's currently at CSIRO's Data 61 team, specializing in responsible AI and also human-centered design. She's got over 12 years of experience across not-for-profit, government, and also private sector, and as an HCR and as HCD practitioner as well, and currently working and driving impacts with the transition and translation of AI research, which is something that I'm really fascinated by. But more importantly, most recently, she won an amazing award. She was awarded the Creative Industries Award at the Women in AI in Asia Pacific, which was probably about 2-3 weeks ago. So we are in very much good hands today, Sarah. Without further ado, I'm going to stop my screen and hand it over to Sarah.
Hi, everybody. Yes, thank you, Amir and Academy XI for hosting me. And I've popped a couple of questions or just, really a welcome and hello in the chat. From where I'm sitting, I can see Amir and I have no idea who's in the room. And so it just helps me feel like I'm talking to real people when I see kind of feedback going on in the chat. So it's lovely to see that there's a user researcher in training here and a product owner and a real person called Dan Levy. Hello. So thank you, everyone. And hi, Govinda. Oh, this is so lovely. It's making me feel really alive here. So what I wanted to do was take you through a kind of like a two-part talk. And the first part is trying to articulate why I think it's so important for designers, and human-centered designers in particular, to start not only empathizing with humans and users, but to start thinking about empathizing with data as well. And I'm going to expand on that a little bit. I'm also going to try and bring in a couple of concepts around AI or data science kind of terms to start helping us ground in, hey, what does design have to do, not just with the interface of how a UI product service is presented, but actually what does human-centered design have to do with the design of the algorithm, the AI model itself, and the data that goes into it. And then the second part is introducing what I hope might be a helpful framework for any human-centered designers or designers in general who are part of multidisciplinary teams working on AI product services or operationalization of AI tools in your workplace for clients. And I call that the 6 Cs framework. You'll see why. They're 6 words that all start with C. Along the way, please do keep the chat alive. I'm actually like kind of scanning it right now. And Amir's going to do a Q&A at the end. Amir, also, if you start to notice a few questions in the chat or the Q&A banking up around something that I'm talking about, please also do feel free to stop me.
So,
Awesome. And team, I am taking a leap of faith. I'm actually not doing any slides. So you're just going to be looking at me doing a chat, a talking head. All right, so let's crack into it. I have been really, really occupied for the last maybe 3, 4, 5 years about thinking about the intersection between human-centered design and data and AI. And my background personally has been, I don't know, I've been like an artist, a dance filmmaker, an arts festival curator. And probably when I was 20, I had no idea that a job like mine currently, design thinking practitioner working with data scientists, didn't know that could exist. But if you told me that then, I would have been like, yeah, I don't do maths. I don't do spreadsheets. I don't do data. But if you are thinking like me, stick with me because I really want to show you why data is a very warm and human thing. Okay, so if we start with a bit of context, I think most people in the room looking at people's roles will probably have a bit of an understanding about human-centered design. I'm using it here as a bit of an umbrella term. So, you know, there's an overlap of design practices. It might be user-centered design, people-centered design, co-design, user or client-centric design. While there are distinctions around these, they all really have their roots in the work of Donald Norman in the 80s. And so what we started to see was this beautiful shift where in manufacturing, we were just like pumping out chairs, pumping out, I don't know, like clothes and all these kinds of things. And suddenly we started to pause and say, there are humans using this. What about we learn to contextualize what they really need, what they really want to do, and start to use that in the design of things. Okay, so that's pretty cool. And I like that. And I feel like that was a wonderful revolution that happened, you know, many decades ago. But I feel like in the last 10 years, we have actually stepped into a different kind of revolution era. And that's one of data. That's one where it's big data, it's AI, and it's digital transformation. I guess we've kind of been going along this journey for a little bit of time now. So when I say data, I actually now do not think about it as sterile ones and zeros or columns in a spreadsheet. And by the way, I still think that's really intimidating, despite having done a master's in data analytics. I'm still terrified of them. But what I want you to think about is actually the stories, because that's what data is. our data is our stories, our experiences, and our lives, just encoded in, well, binary zeros and ones ultimately. But if we think about it, every time we are on social media, every time we're interacting like this webinar is being recorded, there is going to be a digital data version of me somewhere on the internet or a cloud storage drive. Every time we use our phone, every time we use our phone to get directions, we are constantly, as humans, making, storing, collecting data and sharing it, often without realizing. So we are actually leaving basically digital breadcrumbs of our lives wherever we go. And I think here's the point where it gets really interesting for designers. This data is actually being used to frame problems in the world. So we have policymakers and scientists and product creators. They can't talk to all of us. We already know, I think a shared challenge in our design community is we can't possibly go and talk to all the users and do qualitative research with them. But what we do rely on are their proxies, digital representations of users or humans. And so when I made the connection that, gosh, like I love humans, but actually I don't often get to work with the humans. I get to work with their data, and their data tells me stories, but it doesn't tell me the whole story. And so that's kind of where I think it gets interesting, and more interesting again when we realize how much AI systems are actually relying on vast quantities of data that is actually human made. And I will note that it's possible that in another 2 years, a lot of the data being used in AI models may not be human-made, but that's a problem for another time. Okay, so what we are thinking about is, I was still a little bit unconvinced. I'm like, sure, there's data. That's why there's data engineers. Brilliant. I still don't have to touch it as a designer. But when I started to realize that the engineering behind the data at all levels is fundamentally also a design process. So like a data engineer will typically look at a data set and decide how to clean it, how to augment it to make it more meaningful for the data project or the science that they want to do. And often data engineers are not thinking about the data in the same way as a human-centered designer might. So I started to get interested in, well, what are the collaboration opportunities between human-centered designers and data scientists and engineers? Because every time you engineer a data model, you're making micro design decisions about that or about the algorithm. So it also goes deeper than that, right? Because the way that we visualize the data, the way we interact with it, the way we present it, that's also a design challenge. So it's like map making. So maps present geographical facts, but it's really rooted in historical and cultural biases, what actually the map to us looks like. And we know that, for example, there's an Indigenous country map of Australia looks completely different to the states and territories that we know. So every time a designer works to visualize or present something, we're actually, again, diving into a historical and a very human context about that. I've also seen visualizations that will prioritize the story of the majority, and they might compress edge cases or edge stories almost to the point of invisibility. And that's something that I feel really passionate about as well. When we think about diversity and inclusion in design work in the world of AI, I think it's really important that we still find a way to represent edge cases, because they're humans too, or they tell human stories as well. So I think that for designers to start to become aware of how deeply human data is, where it comes from, who it represents, whose stories it's telling, and also whose stories it's not telling. I feel like the entire life cycle of data and the value chain it provides starts to become a design space. And we get to ask questions like, who decides what data is collected? Whose experiences are being captured? Whose are being left out? How might the way that we're structuring this data influence the conclusions that we're drawing from it? how can we present this, through an AI system or process in a way that's accessible and meaningful to the people that it affects or are going to use it. These are all design questions, right? They're all about understanding the users, the context, shaping experiences. It's empathy, it's ethics. It's all that warm, very human stuff. And the exciting part to me is that as designers, we are very uniquely placed to start helping to problem solve in this area. We are very well placed to make intentional choices that really put humans at the center when we are thinking about data and AI systems built of that and the way that they're operationalized. So my first kind of call to action is please start engaging with data. Don't be scared of it. I waited so long to not be scared of it. But do a little bit of work on data literacy, get really curious about it. Start seeing the human stories behind the data. Don't be afraid of how entirely messy it is. Because in this age of AI, digital transformation, the data is becoming increasingly powerful in shaping our world. And what we can do as human-centered designers is actually try to make sure it remains true and meaningful to the humans that it represents. So I'm going to pause there and maybe just, Amir, are there any kind of themes coming through in the chat? Have I convinced you that there is
No,
human?
it's been good, but I've already written 3 questions I want to ask you, but I don't
Yeah.
want to jump in. But maybe the first one I'll ask is
Mhm.
um, qu questions around synthetic data. I think I want to get to the end, but this notion of being fearful of data at the back of your narrative. I guess I'm curious. Data 61, CSIRO, it's a database organization. You've just said you've done a master's in data analytics. Which came first? Was it? Did you thought, okay, data is important, therefore I'll go and do a master's and then I'll get a job at a data organization? Or did you go and get a job at Data 61, then it forced you to go, okay, my data literacy isn't great, so therefore I better upskill? Yeah, what was the order in which you decided, you know what, you can't get away from data?
Um, I think it was when I was working as a designer in an agency and we were starting to tackle our first use cases for AI ML products. I actually hired 2 data scientists and I was their direct manager. And I was very annoying. I was like, okay, what does this mean? Like, how does this work? And I started to get really interested in it. And at the same time, realized that I just did not have the technical chops. So I might have cared very deeply about something like AI ethics, but could I get beyond a principle level and have a discussion with data scientists about like, actually, what does this mean? Or what heuristics or metrics can we use to understand this? And so I decided, no, I'm going to get serious. And I started a master's of data analytics during COVID, which was horrible. I cried a lot. It was intense, like for someone with only basically a fine arts and politics undergrad. I hadn't touched maths in since year 12, and there were units where we had 8 weeks to learn like 6 different programming languages. So I won't lie, it was really hard. But along the way, I started to go, wait a minute, I'm a designer, human-centered design, like there must be a connection here. And I started to try and understand the literature around it and found it quite lacking. And this was only maybe like 3 years ago. So we've come a long way very fast. I started to become aware of Data 61 CSIRO's responsible AI
Yep.
work. They publish a lot. And I twigged that they had a design team. And I thought, wait, if anyone in Australia's got the chops to do this, Data 61 does, right? There's designers, they sit right next to data scientists. And I essentially reached out of curiosity and then got the role from there.
Amazing. Brilliant. Actually, questions do come through, so I will ask a few more.
Go
I'll
for it.
answer this first one just because that's my opportunity to do the sales pitch.
Yeah.
I've done the knuckles if I didn't. So a few people ask where is a good place to start around data literacy. So Academy Excite, we've got data visualization and data and analytics fundamentals workshops and training courses, both self-paced and cohort-based. So reach out to us. But maybe Sarah can also talk about that in a second, but I actually want to ask you these questions. They're juicy ones. So Govinda's asked, Sarah, do you think the most commonly used AI models today have put humans at the center of the model design, considering most, in brackets, all don't use any explicit opt-in to obtain consent to use human-produced data?
I mean, gosh, what a question. I don't know, but I am going to paste a resource in the chat, which is, I guess, specifically talking or tackling the Gen AI foundational large language models, where arguably we could say, you know, humans and what we've kind of produced our outputs over many years has been large scale scraped. In that way, human data is at the center, but have they placed human consideration, intellectual property, those kinds of questions at the center? Probably, arguably not. The resource I've shared was a seminal paper. I think it came out a couple of years ago. And it was basically saying, look, these large language models are probabilistic algorithms. They are just going to parrot the training data that they've got. And I wonder if, sorry, this is the author's hypothesis, is kind of saying, is it too large? Does it actually represent any humans effectively? And do we need to start looking at curating better training data sets for large language models? So that's one answer to that. But I will say, sorry, this is my call to action. We
Yeah.
should, if we feel like humans need to be at the center, then we need to get into the conversation and kind of start to influence there.
Correct. And also, Govinda, a lot of work is happening, especially around protecting artists' work through data poisoning and watermarking, so that creative artists who produce content that is either digital first, digital second, they can sort of run through a system that creates watermarks or poison their imagery that is, undiscoverable to the human eye, but any large language model that tries to train on it actually gets confused and can't replicate that image. And I think some stuff is happening in the tech space. So we're definitely getting there in terms of protecting. And then one final one, and I want to keep you going, Sarah. How do you approach leaders who are very comfortable with data, but less so with HCD?
Do you want to answer a bit of this one as well, Amir?
Oh no, this is all about you. This is
Okay.
I'm not talking, but
Well, I was going to say Academy XI probably has a couple of not just resources, but classes, and also I believe alumni who might be able to speak to this as leaders who've gone through HCD training. There are lots of really great HCD training courses online or being delivered now in person. I actually think one of the best ways for leaders to get comfortable or become more aware with HCD is to hire a human-centered designer and actually let them take you through a bit of that process. Hire them for a project, hire them in your team. They are going to give you so much value because a human-centered design mindset can be applied to almost any industry and any problem space. And generally, you'll find that we are quite I don't know, authentic and friendly and really happy to rabbit on about it. So yeah.
Thanks. Hey, thanks for pitching Academy XI. Yes, we do have HCD and design course and design thinking courses for leaders as well as individuals. But I'm going to park up a couple other questions that come to the Q&A. Maybe you keep going, and then we'll go for a second round as well. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Keep them coming.
Okay. And also I've just seen my colleague who did the masters with me, Sue, is like, we all cried together. So as human-centered designers, we like to empathize, and sometimes crying together is a really good way. Leaders should try it. It's very good. Okay. I wanted to very quickly introduce a couple of terms that you might hear when you start working in AI or with data scientists. I am not a data scientist. If there are data scientists or engineers in the room and they actually want to call me on something or correct or provide a clarification, please do. But very quickly, the first one I wanted to start with was the word algorithm. Which is very simple. It's like a set of rules or procedures for solving a problem. And so designers are very familiar with this. Designers do design processes to solve problems all the time. So I think just at that very fundamental level, that's kind of one way that designers can be starting to demystify things, or asking, the kinds of questions, and knowing that actually when we're talking about AI, we're still fundamentally talking about identifying the right problem, figuring out a process to be able to answer it or solve it. Okay, second word, model. So in AI, a model is simply a representation of a real world, I don't know, scenario, simulation, process. And I think what is pretty cool is that it's important for designers, I guess, to grasp that models must or can be trained and tested and validated to see how well they actually represent the real world. And often the work of a designer isn't just to try to work to get the model perfect. It's never going to be perfect, but actually understanding where it deviates from the real world, or deviates from the meaning that humans assign to their interaction with the real world. That's actually a space where designers can work very creatively and very critically. When we talk about models, we are relying on training data. So the data that's used to train a model, that again, for the model to feel right or to be appropriate for the use case, that's got to be as close as possible to representing the real world scenarios or people, to ensure that the model is going to perform well. A couple of other ones, and these I'm just going to try and expand on a little bit and put them in a bit of a design context in a healthcare setting. So we're starting to kind of get the terms, and I'm trying to warm them up for you and expand on how designers can use them. Okay, I'm just going to take a drink of water though. One sec. Okay. Confusion matrix. I love this word because it's this is when I should have had a slide, but picture a table. It's got 4 quadrants, and the table is used to evaluate the performance of a classification algorithm. So in this case, the AI or the machine learning model is trained to say, is it A or is it B? So if we imagine that we are in a healthcare setting, what a confusion matrix might show us is true positives, true negatives, false positives, and false negatives. So if we think about a kind of a healthcare diagnostic setting, we might be working with an AI algorithm, and what it's trying to do is predict whether a patient has a certain disease. The data scientists might have a confusion matrix of more than one model to kind of say, hey, how do we evaluate the performance of this model for this context, for this disease? So true positives, obviously, that means the patient has been correctly identified as having the disease. And false negatives, they are false negatives, they are incorrectly diagnosed as not having the disease. So we can start to see that actually a confusion matrix in a diagnostic healthcare setting really does start to have some very real world impacts. So as designers, we can look at something that feels quite technical, and we have to go, well, what does this mean for real people? And this is where our human-centered design techniques are really going to come in, right? So some examples, we could use empathy mapping to understand the impact of each of these outcomes on patients. So what does a false positive mean for a patient? Is that like a lot of unnecessary stress for you to do? Is it going to cost a lot to do follow-up testing? But what happens is if it's a false negative, are you getting delayed treatment that, could you have gotten something that would have saved your life if it had tested better? How do we work then with healthcare professionals about how they actually take the predictions that a model is coming up with and communicate it to patients? So how are they currently using diagnostic tools? How do they currently deal with uncertainty? How much certainty do they need to feel confident to take a certain action? We can start to ask all of these questions, which are really working with a very simple technical diagnostic tool and expanding that out into the system and the interactions of real world humans having to use this information. Yeah, so that's, I guess, one example. So we might make a decision, like we might say, look, false negatives for this particular disease, they're really dangerous because if you miss it, it can just come on really aggressively. And we might want to say something like, working with the domain experts, in this case, doctors or healthcare professionals, we might say, false negatives means we default to just taking another test and we wear the cost because that's how we roll for this one. That's what taking a human-centered or health-centered approach means. Okay, I also wanted to kind of point out that we don't need to stay in the zone of only designing interactions. We can also start to influence the model and the algorithm. So for example, if we're starting to see healthcare professionals and patients, we're more concerned about false negatives, we could actually work with data scientists. We could bring this problem to the team and we could say, can we adjust the threshold of your model so that we are trading off some kind of specificity for a higher sensitivity to false negatives? So we actually, as human-centered designers, can bring our insights about what's meaningful and what's important and use it to guide decisions that are really hard for data scientists and engineers to make on their own. What trade-off are you making? Okay. I've got another couple of examples here. So the next one I wanted to talk about is feature engineering. So this is a term that really looks at raw data and it starts to go, okay, raw data by itself is not useful, but what about the raw data can we engineer that tells us something? Like we might try and identify a highly predictive variable that we need to engineer from that raw data. So why I think this is exciting is because data scientists and designers and domain experts and users can all kind of co-create that feature together that needs to be engineered. We'll stick with the healthcare setting. This is I think it's a very simple example, but it's one that I don't actually use myself. I don't use any kind of real health tracking. But if we are looking at AI and the use case is considering someone's lifestyle factors that may or may not lead to higher risk or prevalence of heart disease. So we know things like diet's really important, exercise habits, sleep quality and length, all of these things are going to play a role. And that's where the feature engineering comes in, right? So to illustrate what I meant about raw data versus features, instead of just using a raw step count, we might actually want to engineer a feature that says, okay, like, does that mean that your activity level is generally sedentary during periods of the day? Is it moderately active or active? So we might actually want to start to categorize things, not just look at the raw number of steps. Or we could look at something like a sleep regularity score that looks at your patterns. So you're not just looking at things like the total hours of sleep, you're actually looking at the sleep patterns in the context of a wider kind of health of a person. So it's a little bit more holistic. And so it's kind of, as designers, looking to push for features that we can work with data scientists on that make meaning out of someone's data and presents it back to them in a useful way. So that's another example. And I'm going to give you one more before again stopping for questions and then giving you the 6 magical C's. The final one is human in the loop. It's my favorite because it just puts human like right there. But this is any AI system where a human judgment is actually deliberately integrated into the process. It could be humans doing training of the model. It could be making decisions outside of the model once with the model output. And designers can really start to consider how user interactions are going to help to improve the model performance as well. So again, healthcare diagnostics, we're looking at images of skin conditions. So let's imagine that the AI model we use is very highly accurate. So actually it's brilliant. It's probably, in some cases, like better than a human person who's trying to diagnose it. And that's no fault of ours. It's just that the strength of the machine learning system is the ability to detect patterns at a very massive scale. And humans may or may not have that same ability. But we kind of know that humans don't want to give it up entirely. They don't really trust it. And maybe nor should they. So this is where we want to be able to leverage the capability of AI, where we know it's strong, where we know we can trust it, but also maintain the experts' kind of capability, experience, and oversight and judgment. And so that's when we talk about human in the loop, augmentation. Those are the kinds of things that we can design for. So, for example, we might want to be able to allow the dermatologist to understand the AI model's prediction in the context of showing the image, being able to let the diagnosing clinician actually click in or start to get the model to explain, like, how did you know that? What are you comparing it to? Start to be able to have a bit of a dialogue so that the human is still able to understand everything and make a decision of their own, because ultimately that's, clinician and patient care.
I love it. So the loop, human-centered design, pretty much very, very similar, right? In terms of having, yeah, human.
That's good. All right,
Um,
I'll pause for questions here.
I'll ask this one by Anonymous. And it's interesting. We talk about synthetic data as well. And I've got a juicy one at the end I want to propose to you if there's time. But how effective can the use of synthetic data help to address data protection concerns in training AI systems?
Ooh, this is a
Yeah.
good one. So juicy. Um, okay, one of my favorite case studies is working with the family court on their first AI ML product. The problem we were trying to solve was people getting separated. There's a lot of money, you can hire lawyers, no problem. There's another kind of folks who don't have a lot of money and they can actually access like legal aid services. And then there's a very wide band in the middle, where you're like, I don't really have enough money that's worth paying lawyers to really fight about. And on average, it costs 5 to 10K to get a lawyer to help your separation be finalized. And we wanted to bring that right down as a matter of access to justice. And when I say we, I'm talking about my previous role at Portable, which is a great agency. What we started to do was realize that we started to engage with domain experts and users. We started to identify features in the model, so important kind of predictors that we wanted to be able to get. And I guess classical machine learning training says go back, get your training data set from the closest historical database that you can. But what we found was to get the volume of data we needed to train the model to predict what was a fair split of assets, we were going right back to the 70s, and we had to go, wait a second, in the 70s, we didn't really have contemporary values like caring for the child has a financial kind of contribution aspect. So we actually had to stop and kind of go, the historical data that we have isn't going to be appropriate in this case to use for training. How are we going to go about it? So we started to work with domain experts, not just lawyers, but also mediators and users. We started to go, what are the relevant features that a family court will take into consideration? So things like the length of time you've been together, contributions made during the relationship, before the relationship, value of assets. And we started to be able to go, okay, well, what happens if we take a bit of a random, or not quite random, but something that's kind of demographically, statistically meaningful, and we say for each party, it doesn't matter what gender they are, they're just party A and party B. What happens if we make enough synthetic party A's and party B's that we can say, party A is 30, makes $80,000 a year. They've been together with party B for 10 years, et cetera, et cetera. So we started to be able to create synthetic data only once we understood the features that were important. And then to train it, we actually started to work directly with legal aid family lawyers to be able to say, given any combination of party A and party B, they're not real people, but let's say they were, how would you split the assets and why? And then the next part of the training was actually saying, change one of the variables. So change party B's age, for example. Now tell me again, what would you consider a fair split and why? So that was one example of, I guess, being able to be creative and use synthetic data to solve a problem. I think it's really powerful. I think there's lots of emerging techniques that are getting better and better. And I think for design communities, the idea of synthetic personas is getting very, very, very interesting as well. So I'd say look into it because I don't think historical data is always better.
That's a really good one. I'll keep my question to the end. I'm cognizant there's 20 minutes. Do you want to cover your 6 Cs and then I'll cover more questions? How do you feel about that?
I feel pretty good about that. Okay, I'm going to kind of go pretty quick. So the 6 Cs. This is again for the context of designers coming together to work in an interdisciplinary way with a team. This is not mirrored, right? This is like
I'm reading it contextualized, number one.
Number one, contextualize. Yeah, so really, if we understand that data is warm, that algorithms are problem-solving kind of questions, we can start to really situate ourselves, situate the design problem with very rich context. Even when the data isn't obviously about humans. So, for example, we might have sensing devices collecting data about the environment. But even if we take that, the environment is probably someone's place of belonging. There's communities that live there. Someone who was probably human designed the sensor and would have designed it to be sensitive to different kinds of things. I guess what I'm saying is, if you start a project, please spend the time to become really familiar with the context, not only of the project, the stakeholders, the aims, but also the users with each other, the data that you're getting. So that's my like number one for when you're starting. Okay, number two is connect. So once we are more informed and more comfortable with the context of what we're working with, we actually need to start to connect and build relationships to the projects, to the users, and also with each member of the interdisciplinary team. Because you know what, I'm not going to lie, it's really hard. It's quite hard to collaborate across deeply technical disciplines. Like, I've only given you like 5 AI terms. There's so many more, and I can't even explain them right. So I think what we might need to do is to be able to really value the expertise, the experience, and different perspectives that are diverse, and that's why they're amazing. Between each member of the team, we need to start to be able to actually build relationships, really connect, understand where we differ in viewpoints, also, how we complement each other as a team. Do we have any blind spots that we need to seek to augment somehow? For example, do we at this point realize that we need to connect with domain experts because we don't really know everything in the world? So that's connection. Okay, the third is collaborate. This is probably my favorite because I think human-centered designers in general, make excellent or can make excellent facilitators. So a lot of our job is actually to facilitate creativity and collaboration between lots of different people. This is where the context and the connections that we've built can become really key. They can help us unlock that meaningful contribution and collaboration space. And I think at this point, if you haven't already, starting to develop a common language or vocabulary can be really important. As a designer, I feel like quick iterative prototyping as a way to try and explain what you've learnt about the concept can be a great way for people to be like, that is wonderful, you've got 50% of it, but like this thing that you're trying to represent, This is letting me know that I haven't communicated this technical aspect of it better. So for us to collaborate from this point on, actually we need to sort out a few things. So yeah, I think if the collaboration is facilitated in a way that's respectful of the context and the connection that we've built, we've got a lot of the hump over for interdisciplinary work together. Okay, so that was halfway. Number 4 is contemplate. This is another unique step that designers are very well placed for, because we love design crit. I mean, do we love it? I don't know, but we do it. So we're really all about stepping back, taking a very critical, reflective look at what we're doing, and facing tough questions. So this is the point where we need to be able to flex our ethical muscles. We need to be able to ask questions like, if this model is amazing at what it does, but it relies on a neural network and no one can explain it, is that the one that we want? Is that the one that users are going to be able to trust and accept? I don't know, tough question. This might be the time where you do scenario planning, where you actually design for edge cases, try to reflect diverse user experiences, try to deliberately create ethical dilemmas that might arise and work through them with the team. And also perhaps look at tackling bias and mitigation for it, right? So designers, we can provide through research, diverse user perspectives, and data scientists can help to reduce that. Or in some cases, we might actually say we want to positively engineer a bias into the system that we think is actually more true to the values that we want to align to. 5, create. This is fun. So we've done a lot of thinking, connecting, contemplating, and now it's just time to make the thing. And so it's what's crucial, I think, to understand is that the creation process is intrinsically a design process, because we're not crunching numbers, we're actually designing experiences and predictions with possible real world impact. So when we're creating these artifacts, these new data variables, we really are creating them to take action somehow. And so what we want to do is to be able to create with all of that human-centered design intentionality along the way. So this is where we can bring in iterative design and testing, making prototypes available to people to actually test things out, co-design with users, domain experts, data scientists all together. Finally, this is so boring. Please continue. A lot of AI projects will die at the pilot stage. Sometimes they should. Honestly, sometimes that's what you do a pilot for. It's an experiment. It didn't work for whatever reason. But where you've got something that is good enough to maintain, it actually needs active maintenance, because the real world changes, model drifts, data drifts are going to happen. So this might be, where we start to consider a monitoring and evaluation or impact assessment framework. It might actually just mean that we need to help the team step up and ask for funding to continue the work. But essentially, if you leave an AI model service product alone in the wild, it's gonna go in a different direction eventually. So please continue to apply all of this human-centered design thinking on anything in production. Ta-da! Those are the 6 C's.
Amazing. Thank you. I've got a bunch of questions. The one remaining questions. Are you open for some questions here? Brilliant. I was going to actually, we'll go with Sylvia's question. I think it might be partly have answered in your first half, which is, what frameworks and approaches do you apply with data to create human-centered experiences, especially in terms of data that requires contextualization? And I guess you've shared your example of the health setting, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, someone please do a PhD on this topic, but I think I've tried to share some examples along the way, but really happy to connect with you after and dig into it a bit more.
Yeah, brilliant. I guess more of a comment around, again, the synthetic data. Yeah, I think we're getting to a point where synthetic data is becoming extremely accurate, and especially the volume of data that's created. So I'm cautiously optimistic based on that first question that we will get to a point where we can use synthetic data as a good enough replacement of human and personal data to make decisions or build systems. So I think it'd be a really interesting space to see as these large language models become bigger, require more data, which we can't produce at the same time. So I'm thinking, yeah, protecting humans will hopefully be high on the agenda.
Mhm.
I had, I guess, two questions while we wait for others to post. One was, um, obviously, you're very lucky. You work at Data 61. You've had access to data scientists. You've hired a few. I'm sure there's a lot of people on this call who've never worked with data scientists, data engineers. Um, what tips do you have for individuals, not necessarily to go and find data scientists, maybe there are some in
Mhm.
their organizations, but yeah, what's your tips approaching them, understanding enough to be able to collaborate with them? Yeah, any tips you can share based on your experiences of working with data scientists?
Yeah, for sure. I love that question. I'm so extremely lucky. I think I wasn't always, but what I think if you're based in Melbourne or Sydney, actually, if you're based anywhere online, there's actually really amazing communities of data scientists and engineers. They'll be posting in forums, in threads. There's also lots of challenges, so international kind of data science or AI challenges that you might be able to join a team for and collaborate. It sounds a bit funny, right? Because you're like, I'm not in high school. I don't need a new assignment in my life. But actually, I think data scientists and engineering teams might be very pleasantly surprised if you turn up to one of these meetups and you actually are like, I am just so curious. I bring this kind of perspective in. Are you working on anything? Do you have any questions about the human impact or decisions that your thing that you're building could work on? So that's something that you could try. And there's lots of online resources and courses that will take you through, and a lot of them are free as well.
Right. A good question by Govinda. Would you say that HCD, I'm assuming human-centered designers, are becoming more common in the AI ML scene?
Yeah, I really do. And I'm so heartened by that because I think I'm such an optimistic person, but I would be blind and it would be just insensitive not to acknowledge that AI is such an opportunity, but it is probably threatening a lot of the work that we maybe used to do in the creative industries. And so I'm really glad and I'm on a mission. Everyone jump on my little mission board, because there should be and needs to be more human-centered designers in working in this industry.
Yeah. No, 100% agree with that. It's sort of it's a reasonably good segue to future jobs. We've got prompt engineers. They've been around for a couple of years now. You've got explainability engineers, which in itself
Mhm.
is fascinating, getting individuals to try and explain the outputs of LLMs and other models. Um, but this notion of ethics designers is something I've been talking to some past design leaders probably 2, 3 years ago. Designers who focus on designing ethics and working in the policy space. Have you come across that, or what's your opinion on, yeah, designers who design ethics?
Yeah, uh, love them. What a cool job. They do exist. I think big companies have them. I also think, do you know what idea I had was like, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was just a co-design panel of everyday people who got to, be co-designed with for ethical questions around AI products? It does exist. I see it as a massively growing field. It intersects, of course, with regulation and legal and compliance and risk. So we can see it wrapped under the banner of governance. That's one way to look for jobs or to look for pathways to do that work. I think the broader umbrella for the kinds of work that you're describing, whether it be prompt engineering or like ethics design, is probably going to be something like values alignment. So values alignment is basically, how do you know that the AI thing is doing the
Mm,
thing that aligns
mm,
with the values that we
mm,
have?
mm.
And when you ask that question, there's so many different perspectives needed, so many different disciplines and approaches needed. That's like, there's philosophy, there's ontology, there's how do we define what is good? How do we define what is
Oral. Correct.
And then how do we do the technical translation and the testing and evaluation of how aligned are the things that the AI is producing to the things that we value as a community or an individual? So I think any jobs in that space just,
Amazing.
hopefully going to grow.
Yeah, 100%. And I shared a canvas. I'm a sucker for canvases. I love them. If you haven't come across it, the ethics canvas, which you can download for free, is amazing. And when we talk ethics, right, Sarah, most people, especially maybe designers, go, "Oh, hang on, that's I need to go and read Aristotle and Plato and get across philosophy." And so most designers tend to stay away from that. But what I love about the ethics canvas is a very simple canvas with very simple questions that anybody can ask when they're in the process of designing something. Maybe they're an engineer, designer, product manager, it doesn't matter. But in your teams, in your Scrum teams, it'd be interesting to pull this canvas up and just have it there. When you're sizing up your next project that's maybe it's driven by AI, it's going to include AI, ask these questions, and it's enough for you to go, oh, hang on, that's a gnarly one. Maybe I need to then get legal advice, or actually, this doesn't just resonate well, or it's misaligned with our values and principles. So definitely get across that. And I think, Sarah, you're sharing something as well. So,
Oh,
uh,
I did a cheeky share. I shared the confusion matrix table as a quote
yeah,
unquote this. But
yeah.
that looks like a great resource that you've shared. Yeah,
Um,
awesome.
uh, I was going to talk about constitutional AI, especially, I don't know if you're across that, but what Anthropic is doing is one of the large LLM organizations. But um, are you across, sort of constitutional AI? Is that something that comes up in Data 61 or CSIRO at all?
I think like the concept to me is like, how do we make AI that from scratch or from very foundational principles is not going to be harmful, or like is very values aligned from the start? I have to confess that's probably where my knowledge ends. I don't know how, and I don't know where the cutoff is.
Yeah,
Like,
look, I can probably explain that for people, but I think it really resonates with what you've said is,
mm,
unfortunately, most large language models, as you've said, go and train on vast amounts of data, right? And often training happens in two steps: get the data, learn from it, and then sort of reiterate and test. But what happens is, and these are black boxes, right? Often there's large language models at a point in time go, right, we're ready. They put it in a box, put a bow around it, ship it out to the wild, and then through misalignments and hallucinations, humans intervene and go, oh, hang on, that's gone a bit rogue. Let's adjust the filters and temperatures and parameters and so forth. So it's often requires human intervention after the fact. So Anthropic has this model where during the training phase, it has this first phase, which is like any other phase, but in the second phase, almost like the QA process or the affirmation of the large language model is done with a set of, I think, 60 plus constitutional values and principles. And
mhm,
so the large language model in its second phase has to almost test itself against this constitutional. And if it goes, oh, I was racist, I was mean, that was hate speech, it will
mm,
adjust itself inside the black box. And then, Anthropic then goes and puts it in a, bow around it and ships it out. So um, there are approaches to make these large language model be more ethical and be more
mm,
human and be more human aligned. It's just getting that practice to be, I guess, adopted en masse. But and again, that goes down to this notion of having human-centered designers during the training stage to perhaps prod and ask some of those questions to make
mhm.
sure that the training of the LLMs are going down the right path. But yeah, it's really fascinating.
That is so fascinating. Well, I've got my reading homework.
Yeah, by all means, I can share. But look at yeah, Anthropic and constitutional AIs. It's 1:29. Well, it's 1:30 now. I'm cognizant we've had Sarah for a good 1 hour, and she's been amazing at giving her time, giving us her time. On that note, Sarah, unless you want to do a mic drop and or anything else you want to share beforehand, I just wanted to thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you about this space, and I think we can take the conversation offline. By all means, people can connect to Sarah, connect to Academy XI if you want to learn more about our training. But it's good to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for all the engagement on the chat team. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
absolutely. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you
Yeah.
soon. Thanks, Sarah. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.